Hello and welcome back to the channel. I'm really excited because this is the second episode of the Mind Over Mana podcast. On today's episode, I'll talk about a number of things, from my thoughts on Streets of New Capenna, why I keep leaving Time Spiral remastered off of my box buy videos, how I think Phyrexian chase cards are an excellent sign for draft products and for sealed box investors, the recent Ikoria price spike, some advice for new investors buying single cards, and then what is player versus environment? How might it affect Magic? And is this something you think we'll ever see? All that and more coming up on this episode. So without further ado, let's get into it. Welcome back. So let's touch first on Streets of New Capenna. Just my kind of really quick summary thoughts now that the set's fully spoiled basically, and we've seen whether or not we're getting any crazy goodies in the boxes. Chase card, no chase card, gilded foil, any cards of value. So I think in general, it was highly unlikely that we were going to get a carbon copy of Kamigawa Neon Dynasty structurally. You know, the product breakdown and the chase card choice and all of those types of things. But I did think that there would be something to sink your teeth into in terms of collectability, creating some fervor, making some excitement for players. I really think that they did provide that. It's not obvious. I do sort of question why Wizards wasn't a little more forthcoming or obvious about it. Forthcoming is not the right word. I don't know why they weren't more in your face about the idea that they actually have provided us chase cards. I'll kind of explain what I mean here. I think that the set overall is very interesting. I love multicolor stuff. I love three-color stuff, especially shards or wedge sets. The Jund cards and the Naya cards in particular are really interesting to me. I love the kind of just simple kind of flying haste trample creatures that you see. I do love the direct damage spells, the removal stuff. It's really cool. I also really identify with the kind of construction worker, builder, real estate developer sort of identity that they've placed on the Jund characters. I think that's really interesting. That's kind of a first, but I do love some of the showcase where they've got these really ornate, elaborate, filigreed like steel beams over their shoulders. It's like a really beautiful way to just knock someone out with a gigantic bar of metal. So the set feels cool to me. I think the vehicle tie-in, it's definitely got good continuation of themes from Neon Dynasty. So in terms of playability, I think that this set will have a lot of cards that show up in Standard for sure. But in terms of the kind of collectability, that side of the set, I am excited, but I'm not excited the way I get for other sets. The chase card, the X factor, right? We talk about the X factor in sets a lot on this channel. I was beginning to think for a moment that there wasn't one in this set, and I was like, if I still have the opportunity to buy Zendikar Rising and Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, sets with some interesting X factors. Neon Dynasties is a little less direct. It's like, why would I buy a set that doesn't really have any of that when I could buy sets that do? This set does. So in Neon Dynasty, the draft booster box X factor to me was number one. This set is incredible. Like, hands down, the set is awesome. There's so much to look at. There's so much diversity throughout a particular pack. Vehicles and vehicle treatments, the different sort of samurai and warrior showcase styles, the inverted color and text patterns. You've got Phyrexian chase cards. The borderless planeswalkers are awesome. Like, there's just so much visually going on in the set that I just think that it in general, along with the theme and this like Blade Runner ode to magic, it's really, really cool. The set's going to leave a good taste in people's mouths, and I think it will be remembered fondly. There's a ton of it printed, don't get me wrong, but I do think that it's got that going for it. The Phyrexian chase cards being in the draft box, to me, is kind of as far as we're going to get with an X factor there. There's no box topper for this set or anything. There's no chase card in anything other than the collector booster. But I do like the set for that reason alone. Zendikar Rising is another one I keep talking about loving because the box toppers are so legit. Ikoria is another set where the box toppers are so legit. Those are slam dunk buys to me. But in Streets of New Capenna, The draft boxes don't have anything other than, thankfully, the Phyrexian text card. So the Phyrexian text card is something, the Urabrask that they spoiled is something that you can get in a draft booster pack. This is a good sign to me. I will touch on this a little bit more, but those are really the only X factor that we have for the Streets of New Capenna boxes. I don't know if I'm wild about that or not. I think the draft experience looks like it's going to be pretty decent. So you've got those going for the set if you choose to buy draft boxes to hold for a while. It looks to me like these gilded foils, specifically the gilded foil, I'm calling them chase cards, are going to show up in a very, very small amount of set boosters, but it's possible, and a larger but still somewhat small amount of collector booster boxes. So if I buy, there's 6 collector booster boxes in a case. So I've got to buy a case and a half in order to get 1 rare or mythic. That's pretty decent, like a case and a half to pull 1 of them, and then you're not really sure what it's going to be. That seems like the same ratio and odds from the Hidetsugu Neon Ink in Neon Dynasty. Again, unless I'm missing something, these sound like they're going to be really rare. They also sound to me like they're going to be expensive. The card being desirable is irrelevant. I think. I mean, we're about to find out. Let's put it that way. We are certainly about to find out whether wallet fatigue or desirability or memory really play a part here, because Neon Dynasty's chase card, while it was not the first chase card, to me, we had lottery cards before, right? We had masterpieces and expeditions, but this was the first blatantly, hey, we printed this thing, this specific thing, we're showing it to you. There's one type of them and they're really rare. Go look for them. That they hadn't done before. So it's got a certain history attached to it, albeit not an incredibly specific and significant one. But it didn't matter how good the card was. People just wanted the rare it for its rarity. So the fact that these cards, some of them being gilded out, are actually a lot more desirable than the Hidetsugu. Like, no one wants the Hidetsugu for play at all. But at least they're gilding some cards that have some utility, They're going to be really rare. Some of them are going to be sought after to play with. So I am really interested to see what happens. I predict that these cards are going to be expensive. I mean, maybe on average $100 a piece, because there's just not a lot of them. I mean, you're going to have to open 100 collector booster boxes in order to maybe get close to one of each rare. I mean, that's a lot. That's like that's $20,000 worth of cards you've got to open in order to get those. I won't even talk about the set booster, because 1% is laughable. I mean, if a set booster box looks like it's like $120, I mean, you're talking about $12,500 that you'd have to spend in order to get one of them, right? It's 1%. So this intrigues me a lot. I've belabored this at this point, but hey, that's what the podcast is for. This is for me to just ramble. So that's my thought on, sum it up, thoughts on Streets of New Capenna. I am excited to see that aspect. I am excited about the set in general. I'm not super excited about investing maybe in the draft boxes, unless I saw, of course, a ridiculous deal. I'll patiently wait. I'm not pre-ordering them at $105 or so. I will open a couple set booster boxes on the channel just to get a feel for the set, but I'll kind of leave it at that. So I'm interested to know what your thoughts are. Are you pumped for anything in particular from the set? Let me know in the comments, maybe on this video, and I'd just be really curious to see what's got everybody else excited out there. Awesome. Here's a couple of random, just kind of grab bag topics that were mentioned or that kind of came to my mind. I'm going to lump them all together in this very miscellaneous bite here. But someone asked an interesting question in terms of play design. So I think play design is something that we we do want to be aware of as people who buy boxes. Like if you're in that camp, you might not necessarily be watching this channel, but if you're in the camp that buys boxes to hang on to, play design is something that you want to be aware of, because as play design shifts over time, you can sort of notice where eras were very powerful, overpowered, have memorable cards, and where eras were just like really watered down and underpowered. Sometimes you don't quite understand why. Like Return to Ravnica block is a good example, into Theros. Those were not particularly juicy power levels in terms of play design and cards. They're a good ecosystem, but relative to the rest of Magic, there's not a lot that's like, whoa, pump the brakes, guys. What are you doing over there? So paying attention to play design can inform some of your purchase decisions. It's hard to gauge though, because it's such a broader time intensive thing to really assess. But someone was asking recently, when do you think Wizards will stretch the color pie such that every color's got access to basically everything? Like at what point will we get to a point where I can counter a spell in every color, kill a thing in every color, ramp in every color, etc. So I thought that was kind of interesting, because you see a lot of instances of that in play design, and I think that Commander is is the only thing really, right? Commander is the only thing driving any impetus that Wizards might have to do something like that. You're stuck to a particular color identity in Commander. Commander is Magic's most popular format by a mile. And the more that they give players access to those types of things, the more players are going to want to buy products that have those cards in them. Does every color have everything right now? Not really. I mean, you've got counter spells in red with Tybalt's Trickery. You've got counterspells in white with Mana Tithe. You've got counterspells in black with a number of cards, but at the very least, Dash Hopes. You've got counterspells in green, right? They're really targeted, really specific, or at least cards that counter abilities. So there, only until Kaldheim was that really true. We've mixed red into some blue counterspells and had some cool gold cards in the past, but only until Kaldheim was it true. And you could say, hey, like red's got an actual card that says counter target spell. So that's kind of interesting to me. And that card I think that card is a really good and interesting Commander card. Clearly was slightly interesting in Standard for a moment. But I don't know when Wizards provides these tools to every color. I think what's more important to ask is, at what point does Wizards reinvent the color pie, where they're like, you know what, ramp is not necessarily something that only green should do because everybody needs to ramp. Now all of a sudden green is going to be in charge of X, right? Like, if you want to pump a creature, you can only do that in green. If you want to tamper with stats, you can only do that in blue, or something. Like, they're going to have to shift into new territory, I think. So the question really to me is like, when does Wizards eclipse the color pie, and what we used to think the color pie did becomes, slightly outdated or irrelevant at this point? That's an interesting thought. I think maybe that's just something we can all kind of keep in the back of our mind and pay attention to as cards get designed. There was a viewer that mentioned something about buying singles. Do you buy, it was the kind of the age old question, do I buy one $100 card or $101 cards? And if you're a more seasoned investor or collector, you obviously know the answer to that question. But to anyone listening that is newer to the game or newer to singles buying, what myself and anyone else on the channel who's been around would tell you is it is far better to buy a single card that costs $100 that is justifiably buyable, right, from an investable or long-term point of view, than to buy $101 cards. Simply put, there's a reason that one card's $100. It's valued by people to a high degree, because $100 is a lot for a Magic card. And there's a reason that those other 100 cards are $1, because they are not. Now, let's assume we're talking about older cards, right? Also, if you buy those 100 $1 cards and they all triple in price, you're not going to even be able to make money selling them for $3 a piece each and shipping them out all over the place, and getting getting defrauded a bit by people and having to buy top loaders and postage and envelopes and gas and go to the post office all the time. It's just it's a tough proposition. I would so rather spend my time doing something else, enjoying outside, for example, rather than scratching my head over 100 singles on eBay. So if you gave me $1,000 and said go invest in singles, I would try and find a single card I could buy with that got me really excited. Like I'd probably go buy an Underground Sea or a pair of Wheel of Fortunes or something cool like that. If you gave me $100, I'd try to do the same thing. I'd try to find that one cool reserve list card that's just pushing $100, and I'd buy that. So this is oft repeated by everyone, myself included. That's my point of view. Take it with a grain of salt. As long as you're having fun, being honest, and not spending money that you really shouldn't be on this stuff, you can do whatever you want. Why do I leave Time Spiral Remastered off of my box buy videos? Well, Time Spiral Remastered is an interesting case here because Time Spiral Remastered was, as you remember, when it came out, it was like out of print almost as quickly as it was available. Not out of print, but just unavailable, sold out. And the price moved all over the place. It was a bit of a moving target. I just could never really get a handle on what this thing was supposed to cost. And given that it was a premium price product, kind of like Modern Horizons 2, I'm not buying a ton of it, right? Like I have a realistic budget each month, and to sort of get a raw deal on Time Spiral Remastered or overpay by $50 or something was not something I was interested in doing. I know where the floor for draft booster boxes is. Somewhere between $80 and $85 is what I'm going to pay for draft booster boxes on any set. They will eventually get there. Even if it's for 2 days, they will get there, and I will be ready and I will scoop them up. You can't really afford to make a bad deal. You will don't get me wrong, you will make them. It's not if, it's when. But when you're really going all in on something, and like I'd have to kind of go all in a particular month on something that costs $250 a box. I don't really want to question whether or not I did that correctly. Like Modern Horizons 2 is $208 a box. Like that's just what it is. That's the floor. That is its immutable price point for right now until it's just not available anymore. So, okay, I have to accept that price. I know that that's the floor. I don't know that it'll be cheaper than that. If it ever dips down in like a flash sale or something, what I'll be doing. But that's a comfortable price for me because it's predictable and understandable. If it were just so immutable, or if it were so mercurial and it moved all over the place and I couldn't really quite figure out what it was supposed to be, that's not a comfortable place for me to be when I'm buying something for the long term and I'm really relying on my ability to get a good deal up front and then hold on to this thing and track it predictably. So I sat out on Time Spiral Remastered because I just didn't appreciate this ridiculously limited print run. I don't like to fight to give people my money, if that makes any sense. I don't believe in having to compete to spend my money on something. This is one of the reasons why, not to get off on an old man tangent, but this is one of the reasons why the housing market right now has got to be so frustrating for people, especially first-time home buyers. As you know in the news, interest rates are high, real estate's really expensive. There's a ton of people that have been trying to save. Maybe they've been working from home, cutting down on some bills, stimulus money, whatever it was in the last couple of years. There's a huge amount of people that want out of an apartment or out of a rental situation and they want to buy a home, but it's so hard to buy one because everybody else wants to do that also. I think everybody obviously knows this. I'm just reiterating. But the frustration that one must feel when you are trying to fork over such a large amount of money and you're just not even allowed. It's like you are not allowed to spend money. That is a really unfamiliar feeling. It's counterintuitive and it's frustrating. So I don't like competing to spend my money. I don't want to have to try and compete to find a good deal on something. I like to a degree, right? Like sniffing around to see when a booster box is on sale online is hardly the same as trying to make 30 offers on 30 different houses and just get denied because you don't have all cash or something. Like I can definitely understand why some folks would be frustrated with that. So that's like a mantra of mine too. I don't want to compete to give people my money. It's not a good practice to get into. So Time Spiral Remastered just rubbed me the wrong way. It gave me that impression, and I was like, there's something going on here where I just don't want to be caught in the middle of everybody frantically trying to figure out how much this thing is supposed to cost. I just wasn't interested. There are just way too many other things for me to go buy than that. So do I like the set? Oh man, absolutely. That block I remember very vividly. I remember the Pickles deck, helmed by Brine Elemental. So Brine, saltwater, Pickles. Hey, the Pickles deck was frustrating to play against. It was like blue control in standard. I, though, will never forget winning an in-store tournament at Neutral Ground in New York City when I lived there. I'm really dating myself because they were legendary, but they closed down a long time ago. I used look this up, Shivan Meteor on a Stuffy Doll to kill someone. It was a 13 damage spell that hits a creature, and Stuffy Doll obviously comes into play. You pick a player. Whenever it's damaged, it damages that player instead. So I was just shooting Shivan Meteors at Stuffy Dolls. It was a wonderful time for Magic. I will never forget that the satisfaction, and no one actually had thought of that combo. Well, not really a combo, it's just a synergy. I think it was too like silly for people to take seriously, but when I did it, everyone was like, "Oh my gosh, what just happened?" You know, this was 2006, so this was not this. We didn't have the access to the types of internet postings that everyone has today, where this info spreads so quickly. So anyway, I was very nostalgic for the block. I love it. I thought that kind of curating down a block into a single set is a really cool idea. Man, I hope they do that for a bunch of other sets. Like they'd have to do it sort of post-reserved list sets, because you're going to have to leave out too many awesome cards if you say like did the Urza block and you had to leave the reserve list cards out of it. Although, dude, I would totally buy that. Who am I kidding? I would buy that so fast. That's probably my favorite block of all time. So that's like most people's. But anyway, that's why I left Time Spiral Remastered off my list. I am actually curious, is anybody out there on this channel invested in that? Did you get it for a good price? Do you feel the same way I do, kind of about the price being a moving target? I would just be curious to know. So that hopefully that sheds a little light on why sometimes, in rare exceptions, I do pass on some products. So I was talking to someone the other day about Kaldheim in particular, not about Kaldheim, but really what it implied to me about the current world building and sort of set block structure that Wizards has. I don't know if this is something that has been talked about on their front recently, but as you'll recall, and since this is the podcast format, I can just rattle this off, and there's nothing you can do about it. But humor the old person. Obviously, back in the day, there was just, in terms of expansion sets, right? That's kind of where I'm going with this, the structure of blocks and sets. Back in the day, we just had single one-off expansions, from a company that loved what they were doing, but didn't know whether they were going to see tomorrow at certain points, right? So you get single blocks. Once you get past 4th edition and into the more modern era, we start with like Mirage and Visions and Weatherlight. into the Wrath cycle. We have 3 sets that make up a block. Wizards did this for years and then eventually got off of that and switched over to the 2-block model. We got this with post-Khans of Tarkir. We got this in around, Eldritch Moon, Shadows over Innistrad, right? Like Kaladesh, Ixalan, Amonkhet. And then Wizards said, we're going to kind of do whatever we want. We can do a single block, we can do 2, we can do 3, we can do whatever. We're just going to make Magic, enjoy it. So you even see instances where, okay, they've got a single set, like Ikoria comes out, Theros Beyond Death comes out, or Throne of Eldraine, right? One-off sets. But then you have something where they're like, hey, we're going to do a big arc. We're going to kind of bring the Nicol Bolas era to an end, and we'll have Guilds of Ravnica, Ravnica Allegiance, and then War of the Spark. And we'll have this big, massive, epic tie-in, best set trailer ever by a mile, by the way. War of the Spark trailer. I still watch it. Is that really is that really off-putting? I still watch that trailer. Like everything about it is just so awesome to me. I think it was really well done. It was a emotional the right way, super super cool. It got me so excited for that set. So mission accomplished. I think it was like trending in the top 10 videos of YouTube the day it came out too. Like that's pretty big. That's a pretty big deal for Magic. This is obviously way in the rearview mirror, but what I thought was interesting, so you get into this habit of like, oh, it's a single set. Well, what's cool about that is when they announce the new products each year, we see this long list of new planes we're going to go visit or planes we're going to revisit or what have you. And we're like, wow, there's a lot of new stuff and planeswalkers and mechanics and content that's coming our way. This is so exciting. Whereas it used to be that you'd kind of sit on a single plane for almost a year. If we thought about that now, if they were like, hey, we're going back to Mercadia, okay, random choice or whatever, and we're going to be there all year, you'd be like, okay, I'm really not used to that anymore. How do I feel about that? So it is sort of understandable at this point why Wizards stopped doing that. The third set was often really, really tough for them. People were kind of exhausted at that point by the set itself. So I totally understand why they got off the 3-set block model. Like, totally get it. But now, so a set like Kaldheim comes out, and I'm really excited about Kaldheim. I love the lore. I love the attitude. I love the alternate art style. Like, I think it's just really cool. It's like a set with a lot of heft to it, a lot of weight. And the world building was just phenomenal to me. I thought it was so cool. Like the realms inside of the plane, they could have done at the very least 2 sets to flesh out Kaldheim, and I think it would have been awesome. But the fact that they let it sort of simmer in one set is, I think maybe it didn't do enough service to Kaldheim. Like it's got so much more going for it. And Kaldheim aside, you've got to wonder, how much do we really want? Like, do we want the sequel in a way? I was watching a podcast that I absolutely love the other day called the Resonant Arc podcast. They tend to discuss role-playing games, video game RPGs, older ones in particular, and they were talking about Final Fantasy X, and they brought up a really interesting point. At the time when Final Fantasy X came out, so this is early 2000s, you have the executive vice president of Square Enix and the president of Square Enix talking to the COO, and they're discussing whether or not they're going to make, like, what's the next Final Fantasy game going to be after Final Fantasy X. And the COO, Yoichi Wada, was like, oh, yes, there's going to be a direct sequel because that's so easy to make. We've already built the world, right? We just recycle everything. We recycle all the assets. We've got all the art direction. We've got everything. Like, why wouldn't we? We've invested all this time and effort into creating this world. Let's do sequels. Like, we should at least get 3 games out of a world, And the VP and the Square president were like, no, we're not going to do any direct sequels ever. Like, that's so counter to our studio because they are creatively void. They offer nothing new. All you have left really to introduce the world is the secondary innovation. The primary innovation is the world. Like, we brought you the world. We brought you the world of Final Fantasy X. We can't bring you another world of Final Fantasy X because that would be the next Final Fantasy. So I can't really call that a sequel. The major innovation's already done. All I can do now is innovate within the innovation. That's like the secondary level. So I can write new stories inside of this world, but I'm still in the world that I created. You know, I've still got the overarching mythos of this under our belts. The next thing we can do is just innovate on the narrative, innovate on the character design, innovate on maybe some mechanics and menus and things. But those are all secondary innovations. To me, and this is my personal opinion, and it seems to be theirs too, the primary innovation is the one that really counts. It's the world that you create. So that is why I think that the multiple sets in a block is such a difficult thing to think about, because obviously there's really not a right answer, you know. And what is right anyway? Is right the thing that makes the most money? Is right the thing that is the most interesting and the most creative, the most expressive? Like, where do you want to land? Because on the one hand, it's exhausting, you know, it's financially exhausting to keep rebuilding a world every single time you go back to the drawing board. It's a little more efficient to reuse those assets in a way to further a story or something, and maybe say, okay, the next version of this. This is where I think games like the Final Fantasy VII Remake, and I don't mean to alienate anybody if you're not really into this stuff, but I personally have not played the game yet. I would love to someday, but this is where I think that particular game settles in the right territory. I mean, arguably, it to some it may seem like a bit of a cash grab. So Square remade Final Fantasy VII, like wholly remade, reinvented the game, and they're releasing it in like pieces. The game is so so detailed and so involved and so in depth that it really does lend itself to having multiple chapters released. Like, I don't know how you'd play a 100-hour version of this thing in one disc. Like, that just sounds nuts to me. So that is like, okay, we're going to be reusing this to make more, but we're not trying to reinvent the wheel every time. We're adding another chapter to the story. Like, it's a direct continuation. Like, we don't always get that in games. It tends to not at least feel like that, as long as they're not in quick succession. So I do sort of struggle with deciding where I sit on this. Like, on the one hand, do I want more? Well, that all depends if I had enough in the beginning. You know, was I like, okay, this set, I get it, it's a one-trick pony, next. Or like on Dominaria, like this is getting like way too biased, but I could live on Dominaria forever in Magic. Like, basically we were for so much of the time I played the game. We were just on, like, that just was Magic. Magic existed on Dominaria. And then the idea that we would travel to all of these other planes was a later phenomenon. You know, everything aside from, you know, some of the earlier expansions arguably being, right, like they were set on alternative planes. So that as an idea is always there, but we were always kind of encamped in Dominaria, more or less. With obviously some exceptions, but the vast majority of the, you know, late 90s, early 2000s took place on Dominaria. So circling back to Kaldheim, you have to decide, have I had enough, and has this set been given its due justice? You know, I think that's always going to be subjective, and it's really a dice roll for Wizards because, you know, being under the umbrella of Hasbro for so long now, it's really risky for them to take it's risky to take risk. I know that sounds stupid, but it's risky for them to take creative risks. You know, the things known as creative risks are like, hey, we're going to try something that's never been done before to a really noticeable degree. This would be like Unfinity, right? Like, Unfinity coming out is a major creative risk because it might fall flat, it might alienate your player base, it might not be for everybody, it might come across as like a really, really limited audience. And that, as a creative risk, is a financial risk for Hasbro because they're like, well, we're spending all the time and shelf space and marketing window on this product. We could have spent that on something else that people would have liked. We could have made more money, you know? We could have appealed to more people. Making money is not a problem. If they're making money, or if they arguably could be making more money than they are with a particular set, it means that more people like it. Not every set's going to appeal to everybody the way it does others. Vampire weddings might not be your thing. Werewolves and the sort of eldritch gothic horror in general might not be your thing. But, crime and Art Deco stylings might not be your thing either. So then you're kind of like, you better be just interested in New Capenna for the collectibles or the gameplay if the styling isn't really your thing. Maybe you're indifferent. Magic's a lot different to a lot of folks. So I do think that that's an interesting idea. Like, we don't do sequels at Square because obviously ultimately they lost that battle because we got Final Fantasy X-2. But I think that's an interesting idea. Like, sequels are creatively devoid. We don't do them. It's like, okay, but how much was left for you to pull from? Like, did you really say everything you needed to say? I think the difference between a Magic set and a single entry video game is that video game its job is to tell everything it's got to tell in that product, that one experience. That's what the task was. But Magic is always a part of a larger piece, a continuation of what came before it, and a predecessor to what inevitably will come after it. It's not always a guarantee that a video game is going to have a sequel, or that it's going to be in itself a sequel of something. You just don't know that. So I don't know. I think there's interesting parallels to draw between there. I'd be curious to know what anyone else thinks about sort of are two sets just enough, not as much. Is it always going to depend? How do you know? How do you get it right? I guess if we had the magic formula for that, we'd work for Wizards, right? Last topic I'd like to bring up today, and this is one, man, I've been really thinking about lately because I heard in another card game that's out there that there's this idea of something called PvE coming to the card game. So PvE is not a new concept. That's PvP is player versus player. PvE is player versus environment. Player versus environment is Dungeons and Dragons, right? Like that was sort of the original player versus environment. We're all going to work together, develop characters, and then it's us versus whatever this sort of story or scripted thing throws at us. We're not against each other. We're not playing other players. We're sort of playing the story. So doing that in a card game is a little tougher, right? Because the card game is supposed to have a call and response element to it. You are supposed to organically converse and react to each other. So it's hard to play cards against, a non-playing character or a computer unless you are literally on the computer. It's easy on the computer. We're just programming the opponent. But in the real world, how do you play a card game against an environment? So Commander's interesting to me because it really does start to lend itself to the longer format Magic. Like Commander to me is like the podcasting of Magic, where Standard is like the YouTube shorts. It's like one of them is for really just relaxing, unwinding, getting the drinks ready. And the other one is just, I'm literally trying to see how quickly I can end this. Like I want this to be over as quickly as possible. So in somewhere nestled in there is some variation. So if you'll recall, like we've had stuff like Arch Enemy before, Plane Chase in a way introduces an environment, but that's really more just like a global enchantment effect. I was reminded of something that actually Magic already did a long time ago. If you'll recall, in Journey into Nyx, at the pre-release, there was a challenge deck where you could challenge a god. And there was basically a paper deck that the store owner would have available to players. You would bring the deck out, and then you would play the deck based on a set of instructions or rules. And you were supposed to bring your deck with you to play against that deck, which was basically just had rules for play. Like I'm just sort of fabricating, but hey, every turn you turn the top two cards over and they get played like automatically. There are no lands in this deck. It's just, turn over the top two, they get played. if the deck ever has to make a decision, like, a card you play says, look at the top two, put one on the bottom, one into your hand, you make that decision for them. But otherwise, they always block, they always attack. You choose how they block, and they play the top two cards every turn, something like that, right? Like, there's a set of instructions, and then you could play against this. So that was intriguing. Clearly, that was something Magic has tried before. I haven't really heard of it since. You've got to wonder, though, was that a good idea introduced in a bad product? Or was that a less than good idea also introduced during a bad product? I don't know. It was really compelling, and I didn't see that really crop up much since. But if you think about it, that's a pretty interesting idea to me. Imagine if you put together a deck, and when you went to play Commander, you had this deck across the table from, you and your three other friends in your play group, and all of you were teaming up against this deck, and it was just 100 cards, 100 bombs basically in a stack, and the deck played 3 of them per turn, and then always attacked evenly left to right. Like, how would that impact you? Like, maybe there's a custom commander that says at the beginning of every upkeep, this arch villain here creates a 3/3 green beast token with trample. Like, I think it would be interesting, and I think you can obviously start, like, your mind can start wandering and say, okay, well, what would I do if I were to just grab 100 really heavy hitters, splashy cool cards, put them in cases, make a deck out of them, and just let it roll? Like, what would that be like? To me, that would be like a player versus environment example in Magic. I think it can obviously get a lot more ornate than that. I think you could write a script, right? You could script out a narrative. You could order all of the cards in the deck, and then you're sort of like a dungeon master equivalent of an arch villain in a Commander game. And your 3 friends from your play group are sitting across from you, and you've got a deck, and you read out a thing and says, okay, it's the beginning of the game, and all of a sudden, there's a rumbling and the ground shakes and everyone mills the top 5 cards of their library. And you're like, oh crap, off to a great start here. And as on turn 2 or turn 3, all of a sudden the clouds part and a bolt of lightning shoots out and deals 2 damage to every creature. It's like you've got these sort of turn by turn things scripted out. I think something like that would be really fun. I'm super tempted to try and just sketch out some interesting little idea to introduce to my playgroup. I brought this up recently, and that's when they reminded me of the Journey into Nyx thing. But player versus environment in Magic, is that possible? Is that interesting? Would that be cool? I don't know. I think it would be. I think it would be really interesting, and I wonder if that's too niche of a territory. Probably is, for Wizards to ever want to involve themselves in. But I wonder if there's not sort of a homebrew rule, or user created campaigns, or a list of like events. It's like, here are 100 bullet points that you could sort of shuffle up or chop up and just go down the list and say, each of these events happens every turn, right? 2 damage to every creature on a turn, or everybody draws a card, or all opponents discard a card. Just some of that, like, you're constantly trying to fight back against this like slightly uphill battle. Like, it'd have to be pretty extreme for 3 people with full-on commander decks to have a remote challenge against a single stack of cards. So, I wonder what that would be like. I think that'd be pretty interesting. I may give that a shot and then follow up and see what it's like here. But Magic's always got lots of room for cool new ideas. It always makes me wonder what is next. Hey, if you are still around, you have made it to the end of episode 2 of the Mind Over Mana podcast. I can't thank you enough for listening. Like I say, this is just the long form audio version of the YouTube channel. It is therapy for me to just talk, get some ideas out there, chat with the wall. Really, I'm chatting with you all. If you have any comments or questions or thoughts or anything at all, chime in down below. One of the best things about all of this has been the back and forth with you all, so I really do appreciate your liking and your comments. And if you do want to follow along, hey, hit subscribe, hop on, hop off, it's totally up to you. I hope you'll stick around and wait and listen to everything else that's coming out on the channel. So At this point, we have been together for a very long time in this particular podcast episode. So again, I thank you very much for listening, and I will talk to you soon.